Hey, what's going on, guys? My name's Griffin, and I'm a filmmaker based out of Orange County, California. And today we're going to be talking about the Red Komodo versus the Canon C200. So this video is not really meant to be like a full-on review or anything like that. It's just kind of an image quality comparison. I rented the Red Komodo because I thought it's a really interesting camera, and I just kind of wanted to try it out and see how it goes and see what my thoughts are using it. Okay, so first section here is going to be full sensor raw mode on both cameras. And the Red Komodo I shot in 6K, 24 frames a second, and on the C200 it goes up to 4K. So for these tests I was using the exact same ones at the exact same focal length. They were basically on a tripod right next to each other, so that way I could kind of make it as fair as I could, and I would just match the settings on both cameras. For the C200, it has built-in ND filters, so I was using those to get proper exposure. And then on the Komodo, I was actually using the RF to EF adapter, and that's the same one that goes on the Canon R5, which basically takes it from RF mount to EF, so I can use the EF glass that I have. And then what I did is I just used the variable ND that's in that to get the proper exposure. As I look at these images, I think both of them look really good. To be honest, I was pretty surprised at how similar they look. So for the red clip, I just went in and switched it to BT 1886. For the C200, I just used the Alexa LUT and I put the saturation to 130%. And I think the images, they look really similar. It doesn't seem like one has a lot more dynamic range to me. It doesn't seem like the quality is way different. I would say the Komodo image, it just does come in more saturated and a tiny bit more contrasty. Which I think is a cool look. I think it's kind of like that Netflix look. I think like a lot of the shows you see on Netflix these days, they're really vibrant and saturated. So I think it definitely kind of fits that aesthetic more. Whereas I feel like the C200 fits a little more like the Alexa look, a little more, which is a little more muted tones. But I think both of them look really solid. Second section here is 4K 60 out of both cameras. The Komodo does have a crop when it shoots in 4K 60. This was one of those things that I thought when I was looking at the spec sheet, it's got a cropped 4K 60 on a Super 35 sensor, it's gonna really bring you down to a pretty small sensor size. In reality, I'll put a little overlay on the screen right here. You can see it's not like a gigantic difference. It's definitely cropping into the sensor a bit there. I would maybe say it's like a 1.3-ish crop. It's not the end of the world. I don't think it's gonna really make that mode unusable at all. When you look at the images, I think both images look really detailed. I would say in terms of noise performance, probably the C200 and the Komodo are looking pretty similar here to my eyes. I know the C200 kind of struggles when it gets in low light in the dark areas. The Komodo looks pretty similar to me. And when you crop into that 4K 60 mode, I'll kind of toggle back and forth so you can see what the full Super 35 sensor of the C200 looks like compared to here's the cropped 4K 60 of the Komodo. I don't think it's like life-changing or anything like that. You could definitely work around a crop of that size. So the next test here is basically a two-stop overexposure test. I wanted to kind of push these cameras to the top of the exposure range and see how they handle the highlights. Because I was using that variable ND adapter on the Komodo, I wasn't able to get a perfect exposure match to the C200, but I do feel they were really, really similar. I kind of like how the Komodo blooms the highlights out. It's got like a little bit of a reddish tint to the highlights to my eyes. And then as we go to the C200 here, the tones look a little more natural to me. I would say it's a little more true to life, whereas the Komodo's got a little bit more of an artistic look. I don't think either one is a huge difference here though. One thing that's really cool about the Komodo, or really Red's RAW in general, is you can basically switch the highlight roll off, and basically you can change that from like soft to very soft, and that'll kind of retain more of that highlight detail. That's something that is really nice about the Red RAW compared to like the Canon RAW, is you can go in there and you can really fine tune a lot of the things that you can't get on the C200. The C200 gives you exposure and it gives you white balance, which is really nice. But the way that Red does it, there's really not a penalty to changing your ISO in post like there is on the C200. The C200 kind of has this way of sort of locks in your exposure, and it'll allow you to pull down the exposure probably 2 or 3 stops and not take too bad of a hit. But it's not the exact same like on Red. Red lets you really change it and not have any penalties on image quality. So next test here is the 3 stops underexposure test. So first up is the Komodo. So on the Komodo, I exposed for the sky here. And then if you go in and increase the exposure by 3 stops, you can see you've got like a totally usable image. There's definitely noise that's present, I don't mind the noise though too bad. It's got kind of an organic film look to my eyes, and I would say that's a completely usable image. Next up, we'll go basically try the same thing on the C200. And if you see the exposure, and as we look at that, is like a grainy disaster. To me, that looks pretty horrible, and I would say that's really probably not usable. Maybe with some extreme noise reduction, but you know, it's not what you want to see. So on the overexposure test, if we go ahead and try to bring that exposure down by 3 stops, we go 3 stops down on our ISO. You can see there's still plenty of clipping there. Now, if we try the same thing on our C200, when we change the exposure, if we go down 3 stops, to my eyes, it does look like it's holding a little bit more of the highlights. So if I had to summarize, from this test, what I'm seeing is it looks like the C200 might have a little bit more information in the highlights, and the Komodo's got a little more information in the shadows. Actually, it's got quite a bit cleaner shadows in the C200. So, you know, this isn't a perfect test, and there's a lot of different ways to test these things. This is just one way to test, and this is what I was able to do with the time I had the cameras. So one interesting thing that Red did with this camera is they included autofocus. So I wanted to test this out against the C200, which has really good autofocus. So I find the C200's autofocus completely usable in professional situations. Here's a little test where I had Delaney walk straight towards me. Here's the Komodo. To be honest, I was really surprised at how well it did. It definitely seems like it's doing a decent job. I know this is beta, I understand that, and from what I understand, they're gonna improve this over time, which is amazing. It doesn't have a way to track your subject like you would on, say, like a 1DX Mark III or a camera like that, where you just tap it and it grabs on. That's the traditional way that autofocus is applied to track your subject. So as Delaney's walking straight towards me, it does do a good job tracking. But if she were to be like going side to side, or if it was maybe an athlete running on a field, I would say it's pretty unusable. There's not gonna be a way to really grab onto that subject. I'd say you're probably better off just doing manual focus. So with the C200, it did do a little better job than the Komodo on tracking Delaney as she walked towards me. She did the same pace both times, and kept her perfectly in focus the whole time. Whereas with the Komodo, it kind of lost her there at the end. And then the C200 also has this really useful mode, which is the face tracking mode, or the face only mode. And I use this mode all the time when I'm doing interviews. When I'm using autofocus lenses with the C200, you can basically just flick it on face only. So if somebody were to duck out of frame, and then they were to come back in, it's never gonna jump to the background. Whereas with the Komodo or even the C200 on that center point only mode, if you left it on that center point only mode, it's gonna jump to the background as they do that. Or if they were to sort of lean to either side, it wouldn't track their face. So that's just something to be aware of. I would say for most cases, people using this camera are not really gonna be using autofocus. It's a nice to have that it's in there, and it's nice that it's integrated with the app as well. But I would say it's not really quite at a point where you can use it professionally yet. So who are these cameras for? I would say if you're someone that wants kind of an all-in-one package that's ready to go shoot, you wanna shoot like corporate interviews, you wanna shoot documentaries, you wanna just have everything all ready to go in a package, I would say the C200 is gonna be a great fit for you. It's got XLR audio built in, it's got ND filters built in, which just make your life so much easier. It's just sort of set up, ready to go. It's got the side handle, the top handle, it's got a tilting screen. It's a really nice package for someone that wants to have a camera that can handle just about anything you throw at it. It's got a really nice lower end codec with the compressed 1080 or the compressed 4K, and it's got a nice high end codec with the raw stuff. So I'd say it's a great camera, and the image quality really holds up even to something like a C500 Mark II. Alternatively, the Komodo is for someone who is willing to basically let go of all those other nice to have features, and they prefer to rig out the camera themselves. And maybe you're gonna use it on set alongside like a full-size Red. I think it's a really good camera for someone who's just strictly concerned about image quality. I would say the flexibility that the Red RAW codec gives you is definitely superior to the Canon. What Red gives you over the Canon mostly is control. The way that you can adjust the way the highlights roll off, the way that you can adjust how much saturation and contrast is in the image, all within the RAW control panel. It's really cool. And for someone who's shooting something like maybe music videos where you don't need to record audio on set, or something like a fashion shoot, like my buddy Kevin, I told him I think this is a great camera for him. So if you're okay letting go of like the XLRs that are built into the body, and you're okay, maybe you're just setting up your lights so it's a little easier for you to just pick your ND filter for the shoot and then stick with it, you know, then the Komodo is probably going to be a great option for you. So anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this quick comparison. Again, it wasn't meant to be super in-depth. It was just kind of more of like a first look comparison. I'll probably rent the Komodo again and do some more testing. And I do have a comparison with the 1DX Mark III in the Komodo coming up. That should probably be coming next week. So if you like this kind of video, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.